Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Other Talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. This is our once monthly talk. We do it every third Sunday morning of every month. That's our time, of course. So that's 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. I am one of your two hosts, Nor Kyle.
And I am the other one of your two hosts, Mushtaq Ali, he of the bad puns.
Yeah, well, other talk, other host. It's part of our shtick, I suppose. I like it.
Do we have a shtick?
I think we do.
Okay.
I think we got a vibe. Well, thank you for joining us. We are excited to have you, and we're excited to have everyone who can only visit us once a month because of our usual talk being at 6:30 p.m. every Sunday. So that's a weekly one. And whenever you can join us, sometimes it might be twice in a day, we would love to have you. Welcome. Do we have any spiel we need to do?
Yeah, we can do the usual spiel, which is hi, folks, and welcome to the Other Talk of the Nine-Sided Circle. If you're watching this on YouTube, welcome. If you are watching this on YouTube and you haven't subscribed to our channel, let me encourage you to do that. There's a little button right down to your right, and if you click on it, you will be subscribed to us. Why would you want to do this? Well, it's simple. You'll get to know when we put things out. It'll show up in your subscribed channel's feed. And you will receive special universal blessings from beyond. We don't even know what they are. You don't know what they are, but they will come to you one way or the other, which is kind of nice. And we would like it, we would appreciate it if you would like this video. We have usually about 200 people in a week watch one of our videos, and we have like 25 of you maybe liking that, but you're not disliking it. So I'm assuming you're not just indifferent. I'm assuming that you've just forgotten to just go down there and click that button that is down here. And let Google know that you appreciate these extremely long yet informative videos. It helps us be found more easily in Google's algorithm, and it would be great. And if you want to join in person in either of our talks, our other talk or our regular Sunday talk, all you have to do is one of two things. You either subscribe to our mailing list, which you will find down in the description below, a link to it, or you apply to join our Facebook group, the Nine-Sided Circle Forum. And let me tell you, if you do decide to join the Facebook group, that you will be asked 3 questions. And if you do not answer them, you will not be allowed into the group, because we have been having a problem with bots. And we don't want our group spammed with all sorts of random stuff. So you have to pass the Turing test to enter this group. And if you don't know what the Turing test is, look it up. So there we have the spiel.
We did it. Thank you, Mushtaq. That was a great spiel, considering a lot of stuff needed to be said.
Yes.
Cool. All right. So today's topic, I think, is probably relevant to a lot of our interests.
What is today's topic?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a mashup, right? Because we're going to be dipping into some yoga-related stuff. Specifically, not the kind of yoga where you're bending backwards and all that. No, we're going to be talking about Samadhi from a Sufi perspective.
And none of our Indian friends are here this morning, which is good, because they can't laugh at me for my pronunciation.
They can laugh on the replay.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't you get us started, Mushtaq?
All right. So first, you may be well asked, why Samadhi from a Sufi perspective? What would Sufis have to say about it? And I will tell you that 1,000 years ago, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali were translated from the Sanskrit into the Arabic. Um, and it was done by a guy, Al-Bīrūnī, who was he was snatched up by one of the Mughal sultans and moved to Afghanistan. But the sultan's court was uh, a mobile court because he was busy invading all sorts of places. And Biruni was with him for 5 or 6 years, during which time he learned Sanskrit. He was very keen on learning Sanskrit because there was lots and lots of incredible documents that he had access to if he read Sanskrit. And so he read and translated many of them. One of them was the Yoga Sutras. And even though it was in the description, I'm going to read it to you again. This is what he said about the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutra is the only subject that gives a step-by-step approach to study of the mystery of one's being scientifically. The basic requirement for a student is to have a scientific thought process, without which it is just another book of rituals. So he took the Yoga Sutras, and it was either the first or the second time it was translated from Sanskrit into another language. There is a translation in Old Javanese about the same age, and we don't know which one came first. I think the Arabic came first, probably, but I'm slightly prejudiced in that way. But either way, it's incredible that this would happen. And the manuscript that he used to translate, which he did in a very interesting way, more as questions and answers than as the original script, because he wanted people who spoke Arabic to understand it in a way that worked for them. This manuscript was passed around a lot in the Sufi orders of the time. It's disappeared from time to time, at least from the eyes of the world, but it has always been refound. And so we have the complete Arabic text and a couple of decent translations into English. I think the Arabic text is more profound than any English translation. But for those of us who only speak English, the English translation ain't bad. Bit academic, but it ain't bad. And so the concept, when I was a lad, when I was a young Sufi, that should be like, God, Pirates of Penzance. When I was a young Sufi, you know. I kept noticing that so much of what I was being taught resonated with the material in the Yoga Sutras. It was like, wait a minute. And at first I thought, maybe it was convergent evolution, but my suspicion now is that that book, which is so profound and is a work of science, not a work of theology, the concepts in it are so useful that they just spread everywhere, at least amongst the Arab-speaking world that had access to that knowledge. And for me, the entire book has been incredibly useful for most of my life. And it has helped me understand what I was being taught from my sheikh, from my teachers. And so we're going to look at this one concept today, which is the concept of samadhi. And we're going to look at it from a Sufi point of view, because Sufis have used it. And we are going to tell you that how it's being used in the West these days may be entirely inaccurate, completely wrong, diluted, any of these things. Of course, this is just me saying that, so you don't have to buy into this. But first we take the word samadhi. It's made up of two smaller words, sama and ti. That's D-H-I, ti. It's hard to pronounce. This is why my Indian friends make fun of me. Sama, it means putting together, joining, combining, union, a whole, aggregate set, completion, accomplishment, conclusion, setting to rights. I'm reading this right out of my Sanskrit English dictionary. Proof, bringing into harmony, agreement and assent, intense application or fixing the mind on intentness, attention. It can also mean an even, smooth, flat plane, level, parallel, same, equal, similar, equivalent, homogeneous, balance always the same, constant, unchanged, fair, impartial. So this word, sama, basically is talking about a sense of integration and attention that is very strong. Okay, I'll get to that later. To the second part of the word, dihi means to hold or a receptacle. It also means to nourish or to satisfy, delight. And the interesting thing, the I in ti is short. But if you were to make it long, if you were to pronounce that E just a little bit longer, the meaning would change slightly to mean to perceive, to think, to desire, thought, religious thought, reflection, meditation, devotion, prayer, understanding, intelligence, and wisdom. So it means all of these things, and you put them together, and you have the receptacle of the still, unmoving, unchanging, solid, remaining mind after everything has been cleared away. It's very close to the triple concept of Fudosin, Zanshin, Mushin that I talked about a few months ago. I'll put a link up. That's the Japanese concepts of mind that are very, very interesting. Samadhi has been given to the West as a state of enlightenment that you achieve. This is utterly and totally wrong. If you look at the old books, you see, especially books of people who came to the West to teach yoga and Indian spirituality, you'll see these guys and they'll be sitting in this state and their eyes will be rolled up in their head and they'll be looking all spiritual and usually they'll have a little light behind them and stuff. It ain't that. It's totally not that. It is not a state that you achieve. And we know this from the Yoga Sutras themselves. I am going to actually pull up my copy of the sutras and find the offending passage. Okay, the 8 limbs of yoga. The last 3 are usually translated as concentration, meditative absorption, and samadhi. So after it goes through the explanations of all of these, it says, concentration locks consciousness on a single area. In meditative absorption, the entire perceptual flow is aligned with that object. When only this essential nature of the object shines forth as if formless, samadhi has arisen. Then it goes on to say, concentration, meditation, and integration regarded as a single object comprise the perfect discipline of consciousness. The word that is used in Sanskrit is the samyama. Samyama is, again, 2 words. Sam means great and wonderful, and yama is a binding, the great binding of these 3 practices together. Knowing this, you have to assume that samadhi is not a state, it is a practice. It is a practice that you do. And this is one of the differences from of the Sufi view from modern yogic philosophy, is that samadhi is a doing, it's not a being. Just as you learn to concentrate your attention and you learn to be reflective of the objects given to you, samadhi is a practice that actually is entering into the flow state, what we call the flow state. When you enter into samadhi, you experience the world exactly as athletes describe the flow state when they hit it really deep. Now, interestingly, if you don't, you can enter into samadhi, you can enter into that practice, you can create the state that samadhi gives you without doing anything else. But if you do, you run the risk of moving over to the dark side. And in fact, the dark side does not have cookies. That's just propaganda.
It's great propaganda, though.
It is great propaganda. And also the Sith dress way better than the Jedi. That's just a known fact. My digital mistress is working again.
There's a reminder from
We were having trouble with it earlier, but good to know it's not busted.
Yeah. I could see you coming out at night when I'm asleep and hitting it with a hammer multiple times.
I didn't do it.
So,
should we see if anyone has any questions so far?
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions so far? I'm just kind of rambling along here.
Did have a question. The last point sounded really significant, and I wasn't able to follow it.
That's okay, because I haven't finished that point yet. We have stopped just at the edge of that point, and we're going to go off it.
Why don't you finish that thought?
Yeah, let's see if anybody else has any questions about the first part that I've said.
Just don't want you to lose it, but if you feel like you got it,
I won't lose it. I got it. It's right here.
Wow, I've seen you nodding a lot. Do you have anything you want to share?
When Mushtaq was saying the state of flow that athletes experience, I was just saying before we started the recording how I had a group of people today, and I said things and taught things I had never taught before in a group, but it was so spot on. It was so, it was, I feel that that might be an example, and I could be mistaken, but from my
No,
understanding
you're
of
not
Mushtaq,
mistaken.
it, it, it,
You're not
it,
mistaken. Yeah.
it was, it really was flow. I was
Yeah.
saying the right things exactly at the right time, inhaling and breathing. It was just really, really not mechanical and not planned. Um, but if I understand Mushtaq, is what Mushtaq is saying, you're saying that's not a state I'm in. It's something that I can practice to do.
Yes. Yeah, and you are in a state. You get a hal out of that, but it's the practice that develops that hal. And the practice that you did was teaching the 5 Tibetans. And I will go so far as to say that I bet you had a group flow, because that usually happens on the 3rd week of teaching the Tibetans, as you start developing flow as a group, which is very, very powerful. So not only were you speaking, my bet is that they were receiving in a completely open way. So yes, you are right on with that. Yeah, athletes are what we usually talk about because their flow states are most obvious. And that's a good segue back into the last part of my point. If you just go for the flow state without the other 7 limbs, you can go to the dark side. The
The other
flow
seven
state
limbs of yoga,
of,
that
yeah,
is.
the
Yeah.
things that are outlined in Patanjali's talk, which comprises the last section of the 2nd book and the first section of the 3rd book of the Yoga Sutras, the 8 limbs, um, which are inner and outer moralities and outer practices, um, posture, breath, withdrawal of the senses, concentration of the senses, meditation, what we call meditation, and flow. Those are the 8 limbs, assuming that I said 8 things. If I didn't say 8 things, there's one more, and it's a secret, and I'm not going to tell you. You're shaking your head at me, Nor.
So
One of the
sassy.
reasons that I keep her around is she will laugh at my jokes no matter how lame they are. So, you run the risk of going to the dark side because the flow state, the samadhi state, produces physically the most addictive neurochemicals you can have. It's huge amounts of dopamine, huge amounts of serotonin, huge amounts of acetylcholine, all of these things that make your brain work really good. When you are in that state, you are being hit with a lot of them, which is why it feels so incredibly good to be in this state. So much so that you want to get back all the time. Now, let's assume that the only way you've ever hit this state is jumping off the side of a mountain in a wingsuit. Because if you do that and you don't go into a flow state, you're probably going to die. So the body definitely will get you there if it can. It will dump all of those chemicals so that you can be in that state of samadhi where you can respond immediately to the present moment in a way that will not whack you into the side of a mountain, inshallah. Sometimes Allah does not will this, but that's another story. Um, and so the state can be addictive if you have not trained yourself. And if you have not trained yourself, usually the only way you can get into this state is to put yourself in certain very dangerous situations, you know, radical skiing or skateboarding where you're doing these tricks that if you mess up, you hurt yourself or you die. Surfing. Um, Stephen Kotler has written some really good books on this. He's been studying this for a long time. And I highly recommend his books. The guy he wrote the second one with, I don't care as much about. But Kotler's work is really quite good. The second one, I don't even remember the name of it off the top of my head. First one is called The Rise of Superman. But he's written several with several different people, all of which are good. The guy who really began talking about this is or was at the University of Chicago. He has a name that I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. But I will put a link to him, to his Amazon books down below. And he's the guy who wrote Flow. Everybody who works on Flow pretty much bases their work off of him. And he didn't look at athletics, but he looked at flow state as a really important part of the human experience. The old term for flow state is peak experience. Maslow talked about that in his Psychology. And it's very important to have. And if you have it untrained and undisciplined, then you will, I just noticed something here. Ignore my hands and everything. My light just tipped over and drove my camera downward. And I noticed my head was getting closer and closer to the top of my room, which is kind of embarrassing. Anyway, so the flow state is Samadhi is the practice that gets you into the flow state. It is not the state itself. And it is not a state that will lend itself towards casual use. Physicality is important in this because it's a incredibly useful tool for getting you into flow.
If you don't mind, I see that Roland is unmuted and he might have a question or thought.
Roland, ask us things.
I just want to take a stab at pronouncing the name, if that's the guy you're talking about.
Please.
Michael Csikszentmihalyi.
That's the guy.
I practiced that a few times, that's why.
I appreciate that. I try and practice it, but my tongue literally like turns, it goes into the fourth dimension when I try and practice all of those syllables. So.
But it's actually much easier than that, like the name looks on paper. Like Csikszent is actually not that hard to say.
If it's you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Roland, because I think people will be able to look that up.
Yeah. And like I said, I'll put a link to him down below because he's a phenomenal person. You can find talks with him on YouTube. I may even find a talk and link it.
Do we have any other
guy.
questions?
Yeah. Do we have any other questions before we go on?
Thoughts? Jonathan, did we answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Good.
Good. I figure we would either answer him or baffle him, one of the two.
So we'll come back to questions. You were talking about physicality, Mushtaq.
Yes. So, as you have noticed, if you've been hanging around on these videos for any length of time, I talk about fencing a lot. One of the reasons that I love, especially historical fencing, rapier fencing is my fave. or side sword fencing, either of those two. The reason that I love them so much, the real reason, is because it's really easy for me to go into flow state with them. All I have to do is get a match against an opponent who's a little bit better than me. If he's super better than me, there's not enough time to go into flow state because I usually have lost the match. But just a little bit better. And to where I have to push myself a little bit, to where I have to pay attention, to where everything is right, I enter flow state. And then I learn a lot because you are capable of learning things much more quickly in flow state than out of it. Everything aligns to make the stuff that you're studying quicker. And I'm able to usually win, even if the guy is a lot younger than me. Yeah, somebody is knocking at our door. Anyway, so fencing does that for me, and I don't have to actually put myself in serious danger, which is nice. I mean, you think, oh, you're playing around with heavy swords, and the swords can be heavy. A rapier can weigh almost a kilo, and a longsword can weigh 1.5 kilos. But you're wearing protective equipment, you have padding on, you have all of this stuff, and so you don't get hurt. But your mind doesn't necessarily know this, and more importantly, your body doesn't know this. Your body sees somebody across from you with 2.5 pounds of steel in their hand who want to hit you with it. So while your intellectual mind might go, even if he hits me, the worst I'll get is a little bruise. Your body is going, holy cow, this dude wants to stab me with a sword, and it responds appropriately. And that appropriate response is to put me into flow state so that I can more effectively deal with him. And so, in a certain sense, after a tournament, I used to come out, oh God, I miss tournaments. Haven't been in a tournament since the plague started. Haven't even sparred with somebody since the plague started. But I would come out of there literally high as a kite, but not in a stupid way, in a, really in the flow, present, total samadhi state, which I would have to use the concentration and meditation to focus so that it wouldn't go wild on me. Does that make sense? Because in that state, if you want to prolong it, you either have to increase the danger or you have to have control of the aspects of your consciousness. Yeah, I knew a martial arts guy. He was a Sistema guy. And he tended to put himself in more and more dangerous situations because that was how he managed to get into this. Finally, one day they found him dead in an alley. He'd been knifed. He'd gotten into a knife fight and lost. The other guy's flow state was better than his, maybe. So I don't recommend that. I recommend the harder and more lengthy way of learning the skills to control the flow, to control yourself in the flow, to not become addicted to it, and to understand that it's just a practice. It's a very useful state. It's a state that human beings should be able to go into when they need to, and even when they want to. Everybody should be able to find the flow state. It has been kept from us for in a number of different ways. One way is make sure that all the kids coming up hate doing sports, except for the elite athletes. I don't know how it is today. When I was a kid, if you were not in that 1% of people who played football or basketball really, really well, the gym coaches ignored you and they tortured you. You know, they made all exercise punishment. You may notice the resentment and anger in my voice as I say this, because it took me years to get away from that. Gym coaches, when I was a kid, admittedly the middle of the last century, were monsters for the most part. And they ruined physicality for a large amount of the population. And we're just now reclaiming that back. But that will keep you from doing a lot of the things that make access to flow state easy. There is nothing in most societies, unless you live someplace that actually teaches things like meditation properly, not the silly stuff with the going into trances, but real meditation, that gives you the tools to get to the point where you can access the practice of samadhi and produce the flow state. So all of this has been cut off from us, and it doesn't have to be. But that's the situation. Because we have turned the concept of samadhi from what it is to this quasi-religious experience where everything stops. And that's how it's often described, is that you stop breathing, you stop thinking, everything stops. And, you know, you have the pictures of the guys who are supposed to be in this state. That puts samadhi way out there, this unattainable state of enlightenment. And it's not that. And we know that it's not that because Patanjali says so. And it's not the end, it's the beginning of the deeper practice. So there we are. This is the thing that I most wanted to say about samadhi today. Nor, do you have any thoughts, ideas?
I have a question actually.
Okay.
I mean, you're supposed to lay the groundwork for this not to happen through the other practices that you're doing. But I wonder, can you burn out on this?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So you
Especially if you
can
don't have the
overdo it.
practices.
Yeah.
If you have the other practices and they are done correctly, you don't burn out.
Yeah.
But if you don't, if you're a flow junkie who is just chasing the state, you will burn out, because those neurotransmitters that are released, not only are they addictive, but you develop a tolerance for them. And that tolerance means that you have to do more and more to get there.
Is there a depletion aspect too?
There is a depletion aspect. With dopamine, if you keep hitting your brain with dopamine, the dopamine receptors eventually die. You start losing them. They'll grow back to some extent. This is why when you do drugs that are that mimic dopamine, like heroin, or some of the drugs like that, it will make it almost impossible to get that high. Junkies start out with taking their drugs to get high. Then they take their drugs to not have withdrawals. It's not about getting high anymore. I mean, there's always a little bit of high, but it is running from the withdrawals rather than to the high. And I experienced this, not with heroin, but when I was young, like pretty much everybody else before they let loose that tobacco would kill you, I smoked cigarettes. And I got addicted to them. And then when I first smoked cigarettes, nicotine, if you're not used to it, will give you a very pleasant buzz. But once you have been addicted to it, you don't get that buzz anymore. All you get is, I have to smoke a cigarette to keep the craving for nicotine away from my system. It's an interesting switch, and you don't notice it until one day you're smoking 20 cigarettes a day and getting nothing from it other than ruining your lungs and all of the things that tobacco does for you if you abuse it.
I mean, I've experienced that with certain medications, like, oh, I have to take it because if I don't, I'm going to feel nauseated.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have an awareness of how it's helping you at that point. You just know, oh, I want to avoid that feeling.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mentioned that because I know that in this work, sometimes people do experience a bit of overzealousness and they're like, oh, I want to maintain this all the time. I want to seek this all the time. And
Yeah.
while
For that, you need to listen to our talk this evening on the states of expansion and contraction from a Sufi view.
I think that will prove relevant.
This is why we decided to do these two talks together.
So, does anyone else have questions or thoughts or even experiences with this that they might like to share about? Can call on people too. So
yeah, start calling on people.
Oh, I did have a comment.
Sure.
Okay.
So the closest thing that I can think of to a flow state in me is when I've run rapids in a whitewater kayak.
Oh yeah.
That'll do it. Yeah.
And like your experiences in combat, these sound like a flow state for the body. But what YL was describing sounded like a flow state of the head center. Am I going in a direction here?
If you are running the rapids, your flow state will naturally more focus on your body because lecturing the waves on the deeper aspects of being will not get you through the rapids. The flow state from the body, the flow state in the mind, the flow state in the heart are the same state. They will express themselves as what you need. So when I'm fencing and I hit that flow state, my mind is quiet. It makes almost no noise at all. I'm just attentive to that moment. When I hit that flow state, when I am talking with this group or working with the client, my mind is still quiet, but the words emerge as they need to because the deepest part of myself is doing all of the heavy lifting for me. And my conscious awareness, my little eye is just sitting there, being still, so that I don't get in the way of me. So you did hit that state, and you hit that state in an appropriate way, because if you had wanted to lecture that little whirlpool about the oneness of being, you would have probably tipped over. Does that make sense? Good. Malu, what do you think?
There are different things coming to mind. One is that when I was younger, I really wanted to work in emergency situations, because I felt like if I have to, I can do things, and I wanted the challenge.
That is one of the places that this comes up. I put myself through college and grad school working in hospitals, and though most of my work was in psychiatric units, every now and again they would need an extra hand in the emergency unit, which is mostly sitting around being bored. But every now and again, the effluent hits the spinning blades, and you have wild things going on. And the best emergency room docs know how to get into that state, and they bring their whole crew with them. And then we're all just working together and feeling each other and sensing each other. If Dr. Bill were here, he was one of the top emergency room surgeons in the country before he retired from that and decided to do things easier. And I would think that he will have some things to say about that. I'm going to nag him about that, as a matter of fact. But yeah, emergency work will get you there for all of the same reasons and has all of the same dangers. This is why you have, you see occasionally firemen who go out and set fires so that they can go with their guys and put it out, because it's such a rush. Or other things like that. Can't just pick on firemen. And that doesn't happen terribly often, but when it does, we hear all about it.
And for me, I was doing the emergency thing in school. I don't know how you call this. Like, it was something you could do. You learn how to do first aid, and then when something happens, we get called and help. And something in me wanted things to happen so I can be helping. Which,
Yeah.
looking back, is like, it's not nice to wish that people cut in their hands just so I can help them, but it was a thing.
Yeah. That's the thing that I'm talking about. Is
But there was
that's
also
the dark side.
Yeah, and there was also the part that wanted to be able to help people that actually need help, not that they get in the situation. And,
Do you find a little bit of the same state when you do your drawings?
Glad you
nowadays I
asked
do.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is something I'm finding now, that the quieter my mind gets, the less extreme things have to be for me to be fully in the one thing. I'm also finding that I used to have to climb and have to climb hard, and now it's like, it's nice to do, and but it's not something I feel like I have to do to be myself. It's an extra.
Yeah. And climbing is one of those places that people go to find that state, to find the flow state, especially the guys who boulder without any belaying and things like that, are just scrabbling up, and if they make a miss, they fall down and they kill themselves. So it focuses the mind wonderfully, as they say.
I'm glad to hear that, it's kind of opening up, that even doing it during quieter, more mellow things, that sense of flow can come out, because it's a beautiful thing when that happens too.
Yeah.
Thanks,
And
Lord.
as you begin to access it more and more with your art is just going to get better and better.
Yeah, I think with drawing, I just didn't. There was just too much going on, too much shadow in my head. So I couldn't listen what wants to happen, and now it changes, and I can breathe, and I can, if I notice that I'm distracted, I can just be like, oh, I'm distracted right now, which
Exactly.
changes it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to beat yourself up for being distracted. You just notice it and come back. Yeah.
Cherie, what do you
Well,
think?
We see Roland's unmuted.
Okay, 1 second, Cherie. Roland, what do you think?
I think the two topics of emergency first responders and art connected for me in a different way. When I was studying photography, there was a classmate of mine who had a photography project, and she was taking pictures of fire people before they left for their thing, and then took the same picture of them again after they came back, and then did an exhibition of their faces side by side. And she called that amygdala, which I found an interesting name. And that was quite cool. It was quite clear. Like, it was a quite clear expression that you could see the difference between them basically coming back still in the state and them sort of at rest outside of that state. Quite clear between all of the different sets of pictures that there was an expression to them that you could see. You notice that there's something there.
So what did they look like before they took off for firefighting?
Just like your regular person looks at you, but when they came back, they had this really, like, they were sort of on fire, like lit up in a, like, I would say it's almost like they were filled up in themselves. That's how I describe that. They were like some substance in them filled to a height that came sort of spilled out of them, when before it was sort of half full. That's how I would describe it.
Wow, that's fascinating. Awesome. Good example. Shuri.
I'm reminded of the Japanese eliminating the inessential. So when you talk about distractions and things like that, everything about flow state, it doesn't matter whether it's when I was trading on the futures market and I'm standing in the middle of a trading floor and it's roaring. The sound is louder than a jumbo jet taking off. They've actually measured those kinds of sounds. But when you're in that flow state, you can hear the voice you need to hear. You need to direct your flow of trading, and you just are in it, and you don't say anything that's distracting. You just, because people will say, you don't say please or thank you or anything like that, you just do it. You just do it. And when I'm playing tennis or when golfers, you know, they do that one single shot they can live on the whole day, the whole week, the whole month. That's why you keep playing this thing. You think, you just want that one experience. It's so brief and it's so wonderful. So that's when you know you're in flow state. It's just a really fabulous feeling. But it's not euphoria that's like a drug or something like that. You're there, and it is quiet in your mind. You're not overthinking. So that I can see that there's experiences in my life when I need to just tone all that distraction down, make my environment in such a way that I can repeat those things. And it's lovely to hear everybody's experiences, whether it's art or whitewater rafting. And I remember doing rafting and kayaking, and you're looking for the line and you're looking at the water and you can see, this is where I need to go. This is it, just go. And it's a beautiful thing. Yes. Thank you for the talk. Eliminate the inessential.
Awesome. Thanks, Shuri.
Yeah, and there was a very important point that she made there. But I'll let you guys guess what it is. And you might have to go back and listen to that again, because she said some things that were really interesting. But let us carry on, because we don't want to go too far over time. We always go over time on this talk, but not too far. Who haven't we heard from? Board. You must have found this state once or twice as a musician or as a martial artist.
I have a tendency to really complicate everything that I do, so I might have and not noticed. But
I'm with you there. Yeah.
yeah, no, because what I was going to say is that flow state sounds very much like something that requires like an intentional challenging of circumstances. It has the way we talk about it now, it is a very positive thing. But what I was thinking about is that a lot of people who pursue spiritual work come from, for instance, suffering, which they want to alleviate in some way. And their flow state might seem inaccessible, and samadhi will most likely be what most people know it as some form of release or lifting out of the suffering that so many people are looking for. And also when you're thinking about this term like mahasamadhi, when a yogi chooses to leave his or her body, for instance. So that's very much what the popular perception of that is. And so I'm thinking like how, if you are coming from a place of suffering, how can you pursue flow state if you don't have a sense of purpose, direction, and if you don't have that access to intent?
Start at the first limb of yoga and work your way around. That's the basic answer. If you are in a complete state of suffering, you start with the yamas and niyamas and look at them and practice them. Practice, first of all, developing a sense of moral consciousness or ethical consciousness, which is what the yamas are. Then you practice certain ways of being in the world. And you do all of the 8 steps, and that gets you from suffering. By the time you get to withdrawal of the senses, your suffering has pretty much been relieved. That's the short answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, in a way that becomes like baby steps so that you're not overwhelmed. I mean, I know speaking from experience with depression and with overwhelm in a sense of kind of self-perpetuating despair, it is hard to do the big things. It is hard to see the big picture. And so it helps to have those baby steps to follow. And I think there is also a way, I think, as an artist especially, to channel that pain into a healthy flow state. But that takes like a shift in perspective. You know, you take misery and you're like, I'm going to create something with this rather than get lost in it.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on your genre of art or music.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I managed to create a perfect copy of my state of mind right now. Oh, it's so dark. Wonderful. A success. No flow state.
The thing though, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, you know?
No, I've been doing it for 30 years.
And I've listened to some of your music lately and it's awesome. Like it's
thank you.
My jam. So yeah. So I mean, I think we just have to, in a way, it's about acceptance too. You know, like if what you're creating channels this despair, how can you hold that? Or how can we hold that without judgment of that as a failure to reach flow state?
Well, yeah, and I think that if we look at the 9-sided circle, the whole sort of catalog of videos and topics, we can't get away from this idea that in order to actually know how to live, we have to develop some sense of intent and a sense of purpose, because coming out of suffering and only waiting for something to lift us out of suffering, that's not engaging with intent or anything. So flow state can't be accessed that way.
I think you're right about that. And I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's hard to go from stuck in your shit to immediate flow state without hitting any of the intermediate steps.
Hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Happens by accident sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I have experience with that.
Yeah.
Yep. But to make it happen on purpose with intentionality, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
baby
And
steps
not
help.
doing something crazy that could get you killed.
Really, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, thank you for making such great points, Board.
Yep.
That was good stuff. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that you have to understand is that flow state is not intoxication. There are a lot of twin states, hal, that are talked about in Sufism. One of which was expansion and contraction, which we're going to talk about this evening. Another of which is intoxication and sobriety. Intoxication is where you are lost in the divine consciousness. Rumi was an example of this oftentimes. He hit these intoxicated states. But he also had the sober states, and he would move back and forth very easily between the two. And he understood that they were both just states. We get crazy when we don't understand that and think, oh my God, I have this intoxicated state. I want to stay here forever. And that ain't going to happen. And they talk about Sufi orders who are intoxicated orders, like some branches of the Rayḥān are known for getting into these really heavy intoxicated states through their zikrs where they do weird things. And then you have like our order, which is known as one of the sober orders because we don't do the intoxicated state stuff so often.
Not that we don't at all, but
not that we don't at all, but it's not the primary focus of our training.
I can say that through my practice with you, Mushtaq, and also the stuff that we're talking about here on the Nine-Sided Circle, is that I've been able to, as an artist, before I could work for hours and hours and be completely intoxicated by my work, go to bed, wake up in the morning and be in it. But now I find much more value in being able to visit the sort of like intoxicated experience of being completely immersed in the process, and then stepping back and observing the fact that I have been visiting in the state and coming back and creating a counterpoint where I'm anchored in myself and not just in some emotion. And it has been extremely valuable for me, not necessarily as an artist, but as a human being.
Probably as both, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So, Lavita, you're the only person we have not heard from.
Roland, I know.
Roland has another one?
Yeah,
okay,
I do want Lavita to speak. He has something that's relevant to what Board said. I want him to have an opportunity, especially.
Okay.
Roland.
Yeah, what Board said did remind me of something that Shikchant Mikhail said, an example of flow state being riding a motorcycle, and that the person riding the motorcycle is in a flow state, but not the person in the backseat, because you actually need to be in control. And in control, that's what made me think you need to have intent if you are in control as well. You need to want to go someplace with that motorcycle and be able to go there with it. And just being the passive person in the backseat, you won't enter the flow state.
Not as easily. There are situations where that can happen. Sidecar racing is one of them. I don't know if you're familiar with that, if they even do that outside of America, but sidecar racing is one guy on a motorcycle, one guy in a sidecar. And you're racing against all of these other people. And the two people on the bike have to enter into a state of group flow or they crash. But just, riding for fun, not so much.
Yeah, I would think that in that case, both have to be in some level of control to do it.
Yeah.
The sidecar person is also leaning and
moving around and sometimes hanging way out to one side in very scary ways. Yeah.
I'm sure. Thanks, Roland. All right, Lavita. What's been coming up for you?
I've had flow experiences. But listening to this, I realized I haven't had one in too long. It's been over 2 years.
OMG.
Yeah, that's why I was just sitting there like, and for me, being in flow state is almost like, the closest thing I can think of to describing it is like being in a swimming pool. When you decide that you're going to go underwater and get something from the bottom of the pool. You know, it's like, it's a completely different state of being. But I will admit that I do not have a process to reliably put me into it. I just will notice that everything is just, I notice it most when I'm driving, you know, where I'll be driving and it'll be like, somebody will do something and I just go right around it, like a dance almost.
Yeah.
And I haven't really driven in 2 years, so maybe that's that too.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm seeing is that, you know, the pandemic has been going on for 2 years now. And all of us have lost a lot because of it, not just with health, but with isolation and changing our lifestyles in ways that are not healthy for us, and are going to have repercussions no matter what.
I think when this ends, we're going to have a few years of people building things back up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's the case.
I mean, I feel that way. I tell people, it's not that my social skills went bad, it's that they're rusty. So if I do any faux pas, please forgive me because I'm still figuring out how to socialize again with people I don't live with. So it's a thing. I mean, we're all working through it.
Yeah.
You know, we're all working through it. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've actually told a few people, because I've received some calls to do things. And I'm like, I don't think anybody's ever going to see me in person ever again. Because some of this is really convenient.
Yep.
So.
You know, you can find it even doing things as simple as like chopping a tomato. So that's something to think about too.
The zen of cooking.
If I show up.
Hopefully
I
flow
didn't
state will
quite
help you
succeed.
avoid that.
Yeah.
Slavita. And
All right.
I wish you building as we work our way out of this craziness. Yeah. Lou, did you have a thought you wanted to share?
Yeah. Something Lavita said reminded me of working with animals. That this is also a way for me that is quite soft to enter in some kind of flow state. When I was working on the farm, and every time I would have to handle the cows, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, sometimes animals draw it out in us, or
Yeah.
they
And
require it from us.
Yeah, they really require it. Like in this case, they have to do what I want them to do. So, and when I don't mean it, they don't do it. So
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you find a lot of that. Riding a horse, not along a track, but like out in the bush, will put you in a flow state often. Controlling cattle, sheep, all of that sort of thing. When I was a kid, I grew up on a ranch, and we had a few head of cattle, and we had to get them to move from one place to another, and we did that on horseback. And to do it correctly, you do have to enter into that state where you are in flow with your horse and you have to be like a unit, and then you can convince the cattle to go where you want them to go. Otherwise, like you said, they'll ignore you. They don't believe it if you don't believe it.
And
sheep
sometimes
are even worse.
Yeah, and sometimes if you're not fully there, they will run away, or if there's a bull, he might kill you.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That was a really good example too.
Yeah, it really was.
All right. So we have kept you guys a while, but I think hopefully this has been purposeful time.
Yes, and later on we will do a talk or two on how to cultivate the practice of samadhi to enter the flow state.
All right, I'll make a note about that.
Make a note of that. Something for you to look forward to or be afraid of.
Are we going Brady Bunch mode?
Yeah, let's go on Brady Bunch mode. There we are.
There we are. All right, so why don't we wave to each other and everyone watching on YouTube? And remember, we have a talk this evening, so whoever can
Yes,
show up.
which will in some ways be a continuation of this talk.
Yeah, a companion talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
Thanks,
We
everyone.
will see you then.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.